Hello, and welcome once again to Horrific Tales. Before we begin, can I just ask that you like and share these videos to help gain as much exposure as possible to the artists that kindly contribute to the show. In tonight's tale, a suburban family faces tragedy while carrying out innocent Halloween preparations. Join us now as we venture into The Killer Scarecrow by Scott Donnelly. Benny Billings tugged the rope and tightened the knot as much as he could. He tilted his head and studied the noose he had just made. It was flawless. The perfect finishing touch to this year's DIY Halloween project. A personal goal he set for himself each year. He draped the noose around the neck of the just completed Scarecrow and admired his creation proudly. Cash Kennedy put his hand on the shoulder of his best friend. "This thing is amazing, brother. It blows every previous year's decorations out of the water. Even the demon elf clan that haunts my parents' flower bed every autumn. Well, those evil elves were the tops. Mr. Scarecrow here has just performed a dethroning unlike anything in history." "It's a monumental dethroning," Benny happily agreed. The two 17-year-olds stood in the living room of Benny's suburban home, looking at the Scarecrow. "Nice," Benny nodded with a satisfied smile. He really felt the dethroning now. Forget the demonic elves, he had outdone himself this time. It was a life-size Scarecrow. Its face was constructed using old rags stitched together, along with recycled Halloween masks from prior years. Sure, the colouring didn't really match up, but that added to the art. The clothing was made from dark blue dyed burlap, and it was topped with matching witch hat that slumped over in just the right way. It had been fastened in an old flagpole with a crossbeam near the top, and was really ready to stick in the ground after 3.5-week construction. "Dad!" Benny called from the living room. Gary Billings, his father, a tall, brooding and handsome man, walked in from the kitchen, drying a blue-handled butcher's knife with a rag. His wife, Louise, joined his side, still holding an open bag of candy that she was seconds away from dumping into a black cauldron bowl. The arrival of the little beggars was imminent. Gary smiled at the beautiful, although eerie, display. "Spooky! It came out great, Ben," he said. He was a proud and supportive father, one that Cash envied Benny for. His father, well, that was a different story. The doorbell rang just then, and a couple of children outside playfully shouted in unison. "And just in time," his mother laughed. "Working right up to the wire, Ben." The candy was dumped into the bowl, and Benny's mother handed it out to the cute little Queen Elsa and Freddy Krueger at the front door. They ran off to the next house, just as Benny and Cash carried the Scarecrow outside and into the front yard. Benny's house sat in the middle of an old suburban neighbourhood on Mara Lane, only a few miles from the big and bright city of Chicago. Trees, now free of their leaves, lined Mara Lane, where cars were parked on either side. The orange and brown leaves that once blew high above the ground were now scattered on the damp road and sprinkled throughout the front yards, as if they were part of the decorations. Children ran up and down the street wearing masks and costumes and waving their bags of candy, each claiming to have had better haul than the next. Benny and Cash carried the Scarecrow to the edge of the Billings property, where a privacy fence separated from the Kennedy family home. They had been neighbours since grade school and had become close over the years. They were in the same classes, shared a lot of the same interests, and the unique sense of humour they shared bonded them, and usually made them an interesting pair to observe. They'd often spout off nonsensical statements, and they'd run with it as if it were a true, serious topic. On the Billings side of the fence, a dead oak tree occupied a good portion of the front yard. It was there when Gary and Louise moved into the home nearly 20 years earlier. Anne had already been dead for quite a few years before that. The old tower swing that hung from one of its lowest branches was an obvious safety hazard, so it had hung as a decorative piece for years. Even though his parents desperately wanted it to come down, Benny found it unique and different, all part of an artistic awkwardness he possessed. Per his request, and constant begging, it still remained, haphazardly hanging from the rotting branches. Benny remembered hearing stories about the tree being haunted and cursed by witches hundreds of years ago. The tree did give off an eerie image, as its branches bent and contorted like fingers from a bony corpse. But Benny always knew there was no truth to the neighbourhood tales. In fact, old man Garrett across the street had told him personally, while he helped mow his yard once, that the oak tree used to be full and lush before it was struck by lightning during a storm. The bolt of electricity killed the roots and the tree began to decay from the inside. Or at least that's what the old man said. However, because the tree itself scared the kids from the block, Benny made sure that this is where a scarecrow would stand, watching the kids who crept by and gawked at the haunted tree of Mara Lane. Benny and Cash forced the flagpole into the soft soil in front of the tree and stepped back to admire the creepy addition to their Halloween night. Benny smiled. "It's a masterpiece," he said. "It really should be in a museum and not his front yard," Cash playfully added. "It will be in a museum," Benny turned to his friend. "The Museum of Creepy Decor called me today. They're paying big bucks for this thing." "Wow, that's crazy," Benny and Cash laughed. They had a quirkiness about them that their other friends didn't understand. They had stupid fun and could find humour in about just any situation. Benny pulled his cell phone out of his pocket and took a few pictures. Being a teenager, he had a built-in gift for the latest and greatest technology. Within seconds he was able to add distorting filters to the image, create a freaky presentation of the Scarecrow, littered it with hashtags, and had it uploaded to Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter within seconds. "Tag me in there," Cash said. "How are people going to know I was the mastermind behind this monster piece if my name's not attached? I'll just invite you to the Creepy Decor exhibit's grand opening." "That works. What should I wear?" "Burlap." "Okay." The two boys were interrupted by a rowdy cluster of kids approaching the house. They turned around and saw 3 other students from their high school. Benny and Cash rolled their eyes and turned their backs to the trio, hoping to avoid any sophomoric altercations. It was the usual suspects: Asher, Milo, and Milo's girlfriend, Zoe. They weren't exactly the kind of kids Benny and Cash mingle with. Actually, they were the exact opposite. Jerks, goons, cretin. Take your pick of bully classification. They weren't in costume, which only meant they were out for some simpleton Halloween shenanigans. "B.B. Billings," Asher called out with a chuckle. Benny closed his eyes and sighed through his nose. He hated that nickname. Cash was the first one to turn round and confront the group. He always had his friends back, and never knew why the trio would always focus their antics on him. "Ah, sir, what brings you to this part of the hood?" Cash asked. "The good candy's around the block." "Ah, sir." "Ah, sir," Asher laughed, mocking the attempt at name-calling. "We're trick-or-treating, you dope. On this street." "I like your mask," Cash said. "Spooky." Asher's cocky smile vanished. He wasn't wearing a mask. "Funny, kid." "I'm the same age as you, kid," Cash responded. Benny turned around now, and the Scarecrow was in plain sight of the trio. Milo, the tall, lanky senior with a buzz cut, squinted at the homemade decoration. "What is that supposed to be?" he laughed. "That's terrible, bro. Looks like Mr. Saunders before he's had his first period coffee." Benny looked back at the Scarecrow and into the dark holes where his eyes would be. Benny was proud of it. It was almost a month's worth of sewing and stitching, building and planning. He turned back to Asher and said the first thing that came to his mind. "This Scarecrow is cursed. If you look at it long enough, it will come alive and kill you," he said. Asher and Milo burst out laughing, and even Zoe smirked with reservation. Cash nudged his friend in an attempt for him to just stop talking. Even he knew that was a stretch of a comeback. There was a line between smart remarks and panicked childish ramblings, and that line was clearly blurred in Benny's eyes. Asher pulled something out of his pocket and menacingly approached Benny and Cash. The two friends straightened up, expecting anything. Asher lifted the item he held, and Benny and Cash were relieved to see it was just his phone. They had heard rumours around school that Asher carried a gold-handled pocket knife wherever he went, so that was what they expected to see. Asher blew past the two boys and put his arm around the Scarecrow. He held his phone back, licked the Scarecrow's face, and snapped a photo as his tongue slid across his stitched mask. Then he slipped the phone back into his pocket and walked up beside Benny. Benny didn't move, and let Asher come within inches of his face. Asher smiled and said, "I'll cherish that sexy picture forever." Asher then licked Benny's face, and Benny reacted by thrashing backwards, generating laughter from the nagging trio. Benny forcefully wiped his face with his hand and screamed out in anger. Asher's eyes widened and he laughed again. "Whoa, psychotic! Forget the freaking Scarecrow, Ash. I think Benny wants to kill you." Milo laughed. "Guys, come on," Zoe finally spoke up, trying to discourage the boys, but also laughing at the same time. She seemed torn between decency and peer pressure. Benny continued to burn with aggression. Cash put his hand on his shoulder in an attempt to calm him down. Benny forcefully shrugged it off. "Benny!" Cash snapped at him. Benny turned to his longtime friend, and Cash said, "They're not worth it." Benny looked into Cash's concerned eyes and finally found a sense of calmness. The front door to the house closed, and all 5 teenagers on the property looked up to the wraparound porch in the Billings home. Gary stood imposingly in front of the door. The porch light was on behind him, and sheltered his presence in the shadows. "Everything okay out here?" Gary asked loudly. "Yes, sir," Milo sarcastically saluted Gary like a slapstick soldier would. In the shadows, Gary dried his hands with a dish rag and tossed it back over his shoulder. "Benny, come on in. Cash, I think you need to go home for the night." Benny and Cash looked at one another. Gary had turned on protective dad mode, not realising that he wasn't going to help their case at this point. Gary went back inside, and Benny and Cash faced their tormentors once again. "Thank goodness for Daddy," Asher winked. Milo and Zoe ran up to the Scarecrow and took a selfie with it. Milo laughed after looking at the picture on his phone. "This thing's hilarious, BG. Good work." Benny snapped and shoved Milo backwards, catching him completely off guard. Milo fell back into the tire swing and rocked backward and forth. The old rope that secured it to the branch popped dust in numerous places. Asher growled and charged Benny, shoving him back into the Scarecrow. He crashed to the ground, and Asher straddled him. "Get off him, Asher!" Zoe yelled, trying to tug at his jacket. He brushed her off violently and grabbed Benny by the collar of his hooded sweatshirt. Cash was in shock and took a step back. Benny looked up at his friend, confused as to why he wasn't helping. Gary Billings burst through the front door again and pounded down the steps of the porch. "Get off him, or I'll call the police!" Asher panicked and struggled to get to his feet. So he reached into the scuffle and helped pull Asher aside and away from Gary, who ferociously stormed onto the scene. Milo thrashed back and forth, trying to get out of the tower swing. He sat himself up, putting all of his weight on the tower. A cracking sound grabbed everyone's attention, and they looked up to the branch where the rope was knotted. The bark chipped off and the branch snapped under Milo's weight. Milo crashed to the ground, still sitting on the tower, and a thick tree branch dropped downwards, on target with Benny. Gary jumped for the branch, trying to stop it from smashing into his son, but he was outmatched. The branch crashed down, crushing Gary's legs and caving in Benny's head. Zoe screamed, sending a blood-curdling chill into the night.
Well, we hope that you enjoyed our latest horrific tale. If you want to keep up to date with future episodes, then subscribe to our YouTube channel and like or follow our social media pages. You can also give the channel support by visiting our merchandise store and picking up some of our items. Please also take a moment to support our contributing artists who very kindly lend their talents to the show. Check out the links in the description on how you can do this. Well, that just leaves me to say, until next time my friends, keep it creepy, keep it horrific.